Okay, well, hello everybody. Here we are in EdTech world with a limit. None of you have a class over 300, I hope, but if there is a problem with this, I'm more than happy to do it again another time. But welcome to the 300 people who've come in and joined. It's a real privilege, to be honest, to talk to so many people about this process, because you're all probably directly doing it every day, and remote learning is quite challenging. But what I'm going to be doing, I'm not a sort of tech expert. It's not my speciality. But what I do know about is Rosenshine's principles. And people ask me all the time, do Rosenshine's principles apply here? Do they apply there? And basically, I think they normally apply in every situation, provided you know how. So I'm going to focus on my suggestions for how Rosenshine's principles apply in a kind of remote learning situation, and give you some suggestions of the sorts of things you might be wanting to consider. So I think I've got about 40 minutes. I'm just looking at the clock now for when that is. One of the things you try to do when you're doing training on, and if you're a trainer yourself, it's to get to model things. And what I'm seeing now is a window of people. And you need to maximize every opportunity you can to engage with people when you're remote. And so one of the first things I'm going to do before I go off my camera is to do that. So if you're in my class and I'm seeing you on my screen, I'm going to be saying hello to you. And all the practice I've seen, right, which I think is exemplary, is heavily peppered by people talking using names, much more than you would normally do, because it brings people in. And it's a great concept that people like Doug Lemov and others have promoted, which is the idea of dissolving the screen. So, if you're in my class, I'll be saying, hi, Karen, hi, Lisa. Great to see you, Claire. Thanks for joining me, Samantha. And I'll be using your names all the time on the assumption that I know you, because as soon as you hear your name, you go, oh, it's me, and I'm here and I'm in, and you're counted. So it's almost like a challenge of doing a remote thing, is to use as many names as you can in nearly every single opportunity. And I'll try to do that, but because I don't know you, it's slightly artificial. Let me share my screen, and I'll go through some slides, and I'll come out of it every so often. So you should be seeing now the start off. So what I'm going to do is talk about how Rosenshine's principles apply to a remote learning situation. What are Rosenshine's principles? Well, I think the first thing is just to have a look at. Sorry, clicking around here. There are basically 4 strands. So any time those 4 strands apply, Rosenshine's principles apply. So when you're teaching remotely, do you need to review material? Do you need to review what students have learned? Yes, you do. So you do need to find ways to check that the stuff you taught them last lesson is still kind of they still have held on to the key ideas. And over time, weeks and months, that they're building knowledge. So that's definitely relevant. Questioning and checking for understanding. Rosenshine says more effective teachers typically spend more time questioning and checking for understanding. Do you need to do that with remotely? Definitely. In fact, when you're live and in a synchronous situation where the students are with you, it's probably the most important reason for doing that is to check for understanding. Because it's a process of cold calling and checking for understanding, as we'll discuss, is how you build engagement with the whole process, that the students realize that they're there, they're present. And it's gold when they're with you. There are some teaching situations I know where the very fact that they've turned up at all is just absolutely precious, and you need to bring them in and make them feel part of something as much as you can. Sequencing concepts, modeling and scaffolding, essentially that's what the curriculum structure is, and how you deliver that is absolutely crucial, but it's definitely relevant. And finally, practice. How do we get students to practice? So it's obvious that when people say to me, do Rosenshine's principles apply in a remote learning situation? Well, of course they apply. The tricky bit is to actually enact all of these things. And so let's have a look at it. I'm going to go through them one by one. The first thing before I do that is to think about sorry, I'm having my own technical issues here. How you think about this process, and I'm not going to spend too long on this because we want to get to the practicalities, but the same kind of model of learning about how students learn applies, which is that we're trying to support students to build a schema for a set of ideas in our curriculum. And nearly all the things which we do and find difficult in a in-person situation are just the same but harder remotely. So we have to think even more about the issues of, say, securing attention. How do we know students are thinking? How do we know they're paying attention to what we want them to pay attention to? Are they connecting the new information you're giving them through the resources you provide them to their prior knowledge? And how do you know they are? So making them actively engage in the cycle of retrieving information from what they've already know from the past to new ideas and thinking about it, selecting information, organizing it, and then integrating it back into their long-term memory is something to think hard about. So you need to have tasks which allow them to do that and to check it's happening. And the idea that things will be forgotten easily is ever present. And then you've got the thing of engaging with them all at the same time. So when you've got students who are either with you on screen or at home and you can't even see them, you've got to have this in your mind the whole time. Have I set tasks which make everybody think? And have I set tasks which make them think about the things that will support the learning that at hand? And are they receiving the messages I'm trying to give? And none of that can be taken for granted. So everything we do in remote learning has got to be constantly trying to answer that question. Is everyone thinking? And then what is everyone thinking about? I think I've missed out an about there. So let's get into it. The questioning, and I start with this one because for me in remote learning, although in other situations I start with other aspects of Rosenshine's principles, with the remote learning, I'd start here because if you have a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous lessons, hopefully at least at some point you'll be talking to the students directly. Now that might be not true for some, and there are some students who are in some situations which I know about directly where they don't have any contact with the teachers at all because it's all remote, and if they're checked in by somebody, it's by a pastoral leader who won't be asking them questions about the work itself. So that is quite a common situation. But if you're talking to the class, the students that you teach, then questioning is how the main purpose of it is to find out from your students how they're coping with the work that you've set them the rest of the time. That's going to be a lot of people's situation. And so you need to make it also have a sort of pastoral thing of involving them. The key to it is cold calling. Now, cold calling is super important in a live situation, but it's even more important when you're remote. So you've got your students on screen and you need to make them feel that all the questions are for them, not for the other kids. If you've got sort of mute people sitting there sort of hunched in the dark, allowing 3 or 4 students to do the chat. Now, how do you get everyone involved? Well, first of all, when you've got people on screen, you use their names. So you might have shown them a video or given them some reading to do, and straight away you're saying, so everyone, I'm going to ask you guys what you thought about the text, pages 35 to 36. I asked you to do that last lesson, and I asked you to think of, to summarize that. So I'm going to ask you now, guys. So Shane, what did you think? Let's have some ideas from you. Fantastic. And if he's verbal and you can see him. And what about Ed? What about Tim? These are names. Ed is actually hilariously not actually Ed. But I'm going to use names from my screen. I'm going to use the names I can see as much as possible. And then the students know that when I'm on camera, I'm going to be talking. So that needs to become part of your expectations. And the more normal you can make that, when you're when you're here on camera, ready to talk, I think that's the most positive thing to do. And you set that expectation. Of course, you're going to say, okay, what if they can't do that though? What if they haven't got a camera? Then you have to do it in the chat. Now, so chat is a really powerful backup for on screen. And here, this is where you need to get people to think and then answer. And what the Uncommon Schools, the Doug Lamov crew call this is weight questions. It's a good name for it, weight questions, where you say, okay, everybody, I want you to think of the answer to the question. It could be an engagement thing straight away. So you want everyone in the lesson straight away. So we've welcomed everybody and say, okay, guys, so let's summarize the text. I asked you to do that reading. I want you to give me 3 points, 3 kind of main ideas that came out of that text, but don't press send just yet. So write it in the chat. and 3, 2, 1, okay, and send. And then you get them all coming in at once. Now, what happens then is obviously they didn't know what everyone else was going to say. But when they come in, you're saying, oh, thank you, Shane. Thank you, Michelle. Louis, a great point. And you're using their name to sort of reference them. And then you might then say to get them to expand. But you might, and I've seen teachers do this brilliantly, where that is what they do. The naming, the names as they're coming in, affirmation for your response, for your engagement, as much as you possibly can. So, but the weight question is a clever idea. So it's, you put it in the text, in the chat, and then you send on a cue. Of course, if you don't do that, what happens is you get this drift of responses, which the other students can see, and then they're not able to think. So going back to the model of the thinking, if that's possible, to see other people's answers before I've had a chance to construct my own, it's not like cheating. It's just that I can't think for myself because I've already seen the other answers. There are lots of different ways of doing that. Pre-call is a great one as well. So sometimes you get students ready to talk online, especially if they're a bit shyer. So you say, okay, I'm gonna read this text to you, or we're gonna watch the video clip. And then, John, I want you to give me the key message that he gives at the end. So John, be ready for that. So John is ready, watching the whole video or the 5-minute segment when you're talking, and then says, okay, so John, what do you think the main point is? But he was ready for that, and that gives him time to prepare. And that's just another way of engaging somebody all the way through the video who may not otherwise have done it. John might be someone you want to rope in, so you pre-call him, you tell him in advance he's going to be the one. And the other great idea, I think, is batch. This is really good for when you've got a whole load of names streaming through. So you're going to say, okay, we've got some lovely ideas coming through. That's good. That's good. So I'm going to hear from, I want you to expand on your answer here. I'm going to hear from Michelle, then Joe, and then Abdi. Okay. Michelle, Joe, and then Abdi. Michelle, let's hear from you. And so you get the students are kind of having a bit of time to think, and then you hear them, and they're individually being asked. Now, all of this is so important and way, way better than just, has anyone got this? Does anybody know this? Anyone got any questions? Just if you got a question, put it in the chat, or anyone got any suggestions, put it in the chat. That's never going to be as good, because only the more confident, enthusiastic people will answer. You get everybody to answer, or everybody to prepare to answer, and then you select certain people to contribute when you choose. So being in control of that, which is what Rosenshine is suggesting, really, really helps. Part of that has got to be process questions. So process questions are just as important remotely as they are in real classrooms. Now, Rosenshine says that more effective teachers not only spend more time questioning, they also include questions that get into the thinking process, the kind of metacognition, which is things like, that's good, what made you think of that? Great answer, John. Why did you suggest that? You know, what was your thinking? And if it's verbal through the microphone on talking on camera, great. Or if it's just expanding in the chat, also great. But what you do is you're following up to the initial response with an explain your thinking type question. And that could be for anything. Okay, I see, Michael, you got B, correct answer B, well done. Why did you choose B? And so he has to follow up with his thinking. And that's a really good combination. Sometimes it's good to combine the whole thing. So you do a multiple choice question, and we'll talk about that in a minute, the technology for that. Everyone's answers, you've seen them, but then you select people to tell you their reason, and that could be really powerful. So you link whole class response, so everybody responded to the multiple choice, and then you check process through individual cold calling. And that combines everyone feeling involved with depth coming through the discussion. So how do you get a whole class response? Well, there are loads of apps for whiteboards. The most simple whiteboard is just this up to the camera. Here we go. Everybody, I mean, I've seen videos of this done well, and I've seen teachers doing this live. So, it's so basic and so brilliant because you just say, okay, it's very dynamic, no tech, but when people are on camera. Okay, everybody hold up your answer on the multiple choice question, which you think it is, and it just works, there we go. There's my A. So you're seeing a screen full of A's, B's, and C's, whatever. Great, good, and that's giving you feedback about what's going on. And then you can follow up with probing questions. Obviously, you can put it into a Google form Obviously, you can put it into a Socrative quiz thing, whatever you're using to solicit multiple choice responses, or you're using a whiteboard tool online. But the main thing is, it's not difficult to get people on camera to give you an ABCD response at the same time. If they're not on camera, then you have to sort of, the other apps are useful, and we'll look at some of them in a minute. But whether it's whiteboards or verbally or whatever it is, getting whole class response can be useful, just like it is in a whole class situation, which Rosenshine talks about. So you've got to find out, you've got to mix these methods up. But the key to it is cold calling. Why? Because without cold calling, you have students who default to skulking in the corner, just sort of loosely being connected, but you don't know what they're thinking. They feel that other people are doing all the main thinking, and they're just sort of watching. They're observing a lesson happening, but they're not in it. So that's key. So exaggerate the naming, exaggerate the cold calling. It's the way to go. Sequencing concepts and modeling. So for me, the main delivery here, the main delivery mode for the curriculum is going to be through explanatory inputs, where you've got PowerPoint, like I'm doing now. This is a kind of explanatory input. But most people are going to be anticipating that at least some students are missing, because that's the nature of the deal here. And therefore, you have to expect that this video you're making is either not to be watched synchronously at all, or it is going to be watched later by somebody who's not present. And both those situations, anticipating pause points is really, really important to develop students' agency for using the fact that it is recorded to empower, to learn how to repeat things, to go over things. And you can use that to your advantage. So you can say, okay, everybody, here's an example on the screen. I want you to study the method here in this set of chemistry equations. And then I'm going to ask you some subsequent questions in a minute. So I'm going to pause now, chunk, and okay. So it's sort of real time. You don't even have to wait. You just sort of encourage them to pause. Right now, here's a partially completed example. Let's see if you can do that. And here's an even less completed example. So you have this thing of, say, worked examples, backward fading, so you do less and less of it for them, because you know they can go over it. Or you can show them multiple questions at once. Here's 3 examples. I want you to pause the video and look at the differences. Can you see the difference in these two answers? I think one of them is much better than the other, but I'm not going to tell you which one is. So I want you to think, which answer would I say is better? Pause the video and think about that for a minute. And then, okay, so let's have a think. And if this is live, you might then say, okay, go back to the cold calling, who's got some answers, passage A or passage B, and then you follow up and say, okay, so Riley, that's great. Why did you put B? And you're combining it with checking for understanding. But the point is that you're scaffolding the learning, knowing that the students can pause and rewind, and you consciously, deliberately encourage them to do so. Exemplars are important. You know, if I'm at home and the only person really around is one of my parents or my older brother or something, how do I know what's good? The teacher's not there, I can't ask them. I need to see one. So I would say for most tasks that you produce, especially if there's a length of writing, or do it for them, or do it with sort of fake text so they can't copy it, but they get a sense of what it might look like when it's finished. So if you're going to write an essay, this is what an essay would look like. Here's one from before. You're trying to produce something as good as this. Show them one, and then scaffold that for different students. You might email different students different versions because they need more guidance than others. I mean, that's just a classic scaffolding thing. You need to vary the level of guidance people get. But I think it's important to encourage some agency there as well. So you can say, look, in the materials online, in the Google Classroom or on Teams, you've got support level 1, 2, and 3. Choose the one you think you need, and don't use it at all if you don't need to, because you do need, in independent learning, for students to develop the agency to get help when they need it, but not to totally rely on it. And you hold them to account for that, for challenging themselves, because later they're going to have to do those things independently. And we can look at that when we come to that bit. But scaffolding the support can be done through different levels of material that you're giving them, and also self-checking answers and before they move on, that kind of thing. But exemplars of bits of writing. If I was a parent and I was trying to supervise my year 5 child to do some writing, and I was helping them, I'd kind of want to, I'd be useful for me to see what a really great one looked like, and I could reference that and say, okay, well, the example looks like this. It's a lot longer than yours, or actually it's not. All you need to do is this, but it's a short paragraph done really well, and you're getting some idea of the standard. So that's really useful. And it's also useful to give them more than one example, because then otherwise they tend to copy the one. So give multiple exemplars is a good way of scaffolding online. Here's some examples of what it might look like when you've done it well, or when you've finished, and then the students know what they're aiming at. Okay, the next thing is reviewing material. So Rosenshine is big on review. Why? For two reasons. One of them is daily review, which is to do with activating prior knowledge. So if I'm about to teach you something based linking to something you've done before I just pile in and say, blah, 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 here's new material, you're not really ready to receive that material until you've activated your prior knowledge relevant to the topic. And this links to this engagement idea. The Uncommon Schools folk from Doug Lamont's team, they're very big on this first 3 minutes. Like, how do you really engage students in an online situation? By getting them to do something right at the start. They say, get everybody to think in the first 3 minutes. So you don't do this thing of saying, hey guys, so how's it going? Yeah, I know it's all really tough. How's it going with the work? Anyone got any questions? Did anybody, have any problem with the work? That's all too woolly. What you do is you say, great to see everybody. Okay, I've put some questions on the screen, which will help you think about what you should know by now. So there's 3 questions. Have a go at them and right now, and then we'll look at the answers, and that'll tell me a bit about how you've engaged with the work. Go. And that's what you do. So you don't get into the sort of how's it all going, guys, kind of waffle. Give them a question which makes them think, do I know what's going on in the learning? Have I read the text? Do I know the definitions? Can I do those quite simple answers? Because they're nice and confidence building. They shouldn't be challenging, these openers. They should be simple, consolidatory, and making everybody think. You've got your class of 30. I've given them a question. And if they're missing, then they watch the video of the session maybe, and they then also see the question that comes up, and they have to also think, oh, do I know the answer to that? Because I'm supposed to be able to answer that question. So that's what a daily review looks like. A quick, immediate thing which makes everybody think. Weekly and monthly review is just classic retrieval practice stuff, but when you're remote, you need to know what I'm supposed to know. I think that's one of the biggest things for everybody with remote learning, is to go long, pitching the curriculum. We're hearing that people might not be back in school till after Easter or before, who knows, it's all very up in the air. But imagine if it's that long. Imagine how much drift there could be week to week for some students. Well, if you were taking a course where the person said to you, look, you're not going to see me in person till April, but we're still carrying on, what would you want? You would want a resource which said exactly what's going to be covered, things to read by yourself if you could, questions you're supposed to be able to answer, answers to those questions so you could check if you're getting them right, and a really clear guide of the tasks you should have completed by a certain time. So then if I've got all that information, I'm going to be okay, because I might miss stuff, I might try and keep up, but at least I can sort of check against. Now that could be a rolling list. You might not have it already, but it can be a rolling list of the key things I'm supposed to know. And I can keep up to it. I can say, okay, yeah, I've done that. I've got that. I've read that. I understand that. I've done those questions. Or no, I haven't. Oh gosh, I'm supposed to have done that by now. So regularly kind of keep in touch with the task list. So most lessons should have a task list. This is what you should have done. This is what you should know. Now, what do the students have at home? Or are you sending them? The knowledge organizers is kind of the simple kind of one-off sheets on this and that, but is it more substantial booklets? If you're piecing your curriculum together from, a bit of some videos from Oak National and some bite-sized videos and some you've done yourself and some of this and some of that, and it's all sort of stuck together from different places, that's great because you've got quality resources you're harnessing. But what's it add up to? By the end of, say, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, what should I know? What words should I have practiced in my vocab list? What grammatical terms should I be able to now use? Which definitions in science should I now be able to use? Which sorts of questions in maths should I now be able to answer? So give those students that confidence, that the material that they're going through week to week to week is adding up to something coherent and it's accessible to them. So that's the first thing, because without the resources, the retrieval practice is pointless. You know, that you can't quiz kids on knowledge just off the top of their head, hoping they know it. They should be able to get full marks on a quiz. That should be possible. So every quiz you set, every retrieval practice activity you set, it should be possible to get it all right because the students can work for it. So I think that's a really important principle. And then, of course, there are tons of ways of checking knowledge. Quizzing, summarizing, mapping. And the Doug Lamont's team call this means of participation, this kind of thinking about ways in which students can engage. There are lots of different ways in which students can engage with work, but you need to think of a way which meets your checking. Now, one of the tools I think is useful, I'm going to sort of go off the slides here, is forms. Now, there are forms equivalents in different places, and you can use Google on any platform. It doesn't have to be Google Classroom. But for me, it's one of the best ones because it allows you to combine live questions with pre-prepared questions. And to me, that's the sweet spot, because some things which are all pre-prepared because they have to sort of all be on a certain platform. And if you think of one at the last minute, you can't really add it in that easily. Well, you can, but it's slightly stressy during the session. But if it's just the odd question, so I'm a fan of this. I've done a little 2-minute guide to this on Twitter, but I'll show you what I think it is. So basically, you set up a form, and I've called this form this week's questions. So this could be to do with the stuff we're supposed to do on this week. My first question is, and by the way, I mean, when you do this, you can, you get a link, you click on this thing, you get a copyable link, and you just paste that in to any, email, any kind of communication system you've got. The students can access their own copy. And then they get a version which looks like this. That here's their questions, they get them, and then they can send them by submitting the answer. So all the students get this quiz. The great thing about Google Forms is that you can set questions of lots of types. So if I was got a new question, you can add, a multiple choice question, a short paragraph, long paragraph. You can make it required or not required. In other words, they can't submit the form unless they've done the answer. So my first question is name. And the reason I do that is because when you see the sheet in a minute, the name coming up is just so quick. Of course, you can do it where it says email address required, so that you see the email address, but I think this is quite nice and informal. Here's a multiple choice question. A good multiple choice question has not sure as one of the options, because when you're in a formative situation, you don't want students to guess. It gives you false information about what they know. You don't want to have the sort of the not sures just distributed amongst the other answers. It's good for them to have an answer which says, no, I honestly don't know the answer. So you could have some multiple choice questions. So I haven't written the questions in, but you can have the question next to it. It says A, Bosch, B, Bosch. So I've just left them as that. It could be a long answer, so you can have an answer which is as long as you like. So you could have a question which is an extended paragraph, which you give them several minutes to answer, not just a quick one. This is a great thing. You can upload a picture of your work. So you literally, in the form they get, so in the student's version, here it is, you see, you just add a file, and you've asked them to take a photograph of some questions, which they've done on paper, getting every writing, take a photo, upload it. And it's actually really easy. I mean, you can train your class to do this. I've done it. I've learned to do it in like a minute, so you can, if you want the students to do lots of paper-based work and to see it quickly, using a form to collect it is really, really great, because I'll show you in a minute, it all comes up in one place. The questions could be, short answer questions. So we've got our questions and the students have got their answers here. So if I'm a student, I'll write in my name. All right, before I do that, I'll show you what happens. I can look at the answers. So I can look at the responses. I've got 4 I prepared earlier, and I can see, formatively, quickly, the students. Oh, okay. So most of you getting answer A, which is correct. B, B, and I can see who got B later. Actually, B is not sure. Here, 50-50, yikes. Okay, so this is a question where people aren't really sure about this one, so we might have to reteach that. oh gosh, a bit of a variation on the answer there. That means I'm going to explain it again. And here's some of the work photographed. So I'm seeing all the answers like that. But brilliantly, there's this tab here, view responses in sheets. I think this is great, because then if you click on that, it opens up the spreadsheet version, which looks like this. Now, I think this is really, really good, because what this does is it quickly tells me who got what answer. And that can be done in real time. So I'll show you that. If I have an answer here, so I've got this week's question, so required answer. So I'm going to put myself in. It's Tom. He comes along. He thinks it's A. He thinks answer number 2 is B, which has got there. The compound produced is definitely sodium oxide. Pretty sure from the question that I'm seeing, on the screen or later. I might upload a picture of my work. I won't do it this time because I don't need to, but put them in order. A, B, C, D, E, just in the standard order. And I'll explain my answer because they're basically in order. That's what I'm going to say. So I submit that. And that goes through. And what you'll see here is the spreadsheet has already immediately updated with my answers. What that tells you is that when lots of students are doing this at once, all their answers appear simultaneously. Now, this is really great. It's much neater than the chat. So if I want to do a quick knowledge retrieval, I prepare my questions. I say, right, here's this week's questions. You've got the link, have a go, you've got 5 minutes, whatever. I get all the answers coming in, submit, and I'm seeing the answers. And I say, oh, wow, so interesting. Right, so Alice and Sam, answer A is actually the wrong answer. And they might know that because if you set it as a quiz, in the settings, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but in the settings here, I can actually set the answers to be a quiz. When I click on that, it gives me the option to make this whole thing a quiz, which means the answers can be built in and the students will tell straight away if they got the answer right or wrong. So they might know they got it wrong, but they still submitted it. So Alice and Sam, so let's have a look at that. I've got a culture of error, to use the teach like a champion phrase, in my class. So being wrong is no big deal in my class because people are wrong all the time. So we go, Alice, so why did you put A then? Why do you think? And she goes, oh no, I know it's wrong. Yeah, I know it was B. It's because I just forgot this and we discussed that, and that's great. We're getting a huge variation on here. 3 people got sodium oxide, which is the correct answer, but calcium oxide. So why, Micah, did you put calcium? What made you think about that? Again, we're talking about the error. So I can see that it's so neat. And this is checking maybe from the whole set of equations we did last week. And this is what I think is really good. I've got their work here, their photos of their work uploaded, and I don't have to go anywhere to find it. It's right here. I can see it even at a glance, looking through this file. So I can see who's done it, and I can see who hasn't. And I've got nice examples. So let's have a look. This could be from English, a piece of writing. It could be some chemistry equations. So pen and paper work is still really valuable if the students have been trained to photo and upload. If you've not done that, if you've not trained your class to photo and upload, you're kind of cutting out a whole set of very sort of low-tech ways of them doing the work, even though it's a slightly more high-tech way of them showing it to you. But it's very dynamic. You can do that in a lesson, half an hour writing, upload, photograph it, and let me have a look. What's great about this is that you can save this for later to study a proper piece of writing, or you can do it dynamically in the lesson to see what they've done and use it as a bit of feedback, as formatively. So it's all in the same place. And the other beauty of this system is that you can be responsive with it. So let's say, as I mentioned earlier, if I've got in my settings here, edit after submit, I can add a new question in the middle of a lesson. I can say, okay, you know what, guys, because I think some of you have struggled with that, I'm going to add a new question, and the new question often comes at the top, which is slightly irritating, but that is life. So I'm going to sort of drag it to the bottom here. And the type of question I want is actually a short answer question. So I'm going to add a short answer question. I'm going to say, okay, I've got a graph on the screen on my PowerPoint. So I want you to explain the shape, explain the shape, explain the graph. And that is my question. And it's already saved. That's what I love about this. It's already saved. I don't even have to save it. The student has submitted their response, but they just go to click edit their response. And here's all their answers. Here's Tom's answers. And what's happened is that the explain the graph is now appeared. So he can say the graph, you know, it's a straight line, it's non-linear, it's, you know, whatever it is, it goes up. Some terrible answer. And he submits his answer. And I now have Tom's answer, it goes up, appears. So I can make up questions, add them to my Google Sheet, and then they come up. So that, for me, this is a really good tool. And if once you get used to using it, you know, students do, you've got this sort of ongoing sort of question sheet here, which is all their answers during the lesson, as well as the chat. The chat may well be your main way of getting questions, but you've also got this cooking in the background. So that's reviewing material. Rosenshine is big on this. You're checking the students know things. You can do it verbally, sort of checking for understanding, but you also check the quality of their extended answer. You can give them 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And remember, in the video, someone who's not present, you say, okay, guys, if you're not present, stop for 5 minutes. You've got 5 minutes to do question 2 on today's questions, and then I'll see that in the spreadsheet. And in the spreadsheet, whether you've got a timestamp here of their answers, the students who are missing, you see their answers coming up later, and you can still say to them later, look, guys, I didn't get your responses to the questions. I still need them because remember, I have to hold you to account. Everybody matters. And I know you couldn't take part in the lesson, but I still haven't seen your answers. So they can't see the other people's answers. They just have to still do it. So I think that's also excellent. So last sort of part of Rosenshine's principles is stages of practice. How do we get the sweet spot of Rosenshine is he says really skilled teachers craft the learning so that you go from guiding the practice, really helping the students succeed in the early stages, high success rate, getting things right, building confidence, building fluency, and then you withdraw your support so they have to then do it on their own. And that's kind of that flow is hard to do. It's hard to do in live, you know, you can practice, you can guide too much. So, you know, you can help them so much they never learn to do it on their own. Or you can dump and run. You can say, right, I've explained it to you, off you go. And the students are just like floundering, not knowing quite what to do. And therefore that's not supporting them enough. They haven't built a high success rate. So to get this right, when you can't respond dynamically live, is hard. There's no question about it. It's one of the hardest bits to get right in this whole remote learning is guiding practice. And if you're a primary teacher with, you know, early key stage 1 or something, I mean, you're totally relying on the parents to guide the practice really when they're not online, obviously. So you're really guiding the parents to guide the practice, which is where things like exemplars and correct answers and so on are so useful. How can you guide live though? I think you can. And my favorite tool for this is Google Slides. So I've got a Google Slides thing here, which I hope here I've got. Yeah. So I've done to me, this is amazing because I saw examples of this from the first lockdown last summer, people sharing this idea. And if I'm honest, I thought this was kind of well understood, well known. But when I did a kind of trawl of methods from my Twitter and my blog recently about this, a few people were sharing this, and I put a little 2-minute video of kind of how to do it. And it was just loads of people, oh my God, yeah, game changer and so on, because they hadn't known how to do it. It's like anything. Once you see it, it seems obvious. But now, why is it so powerful? Well, what it is essentially is a slide. This is a Google slide. So here's a task. But it's a slide, it's a presentation of slides that all the students are joint editors of. So in the share permissions, I make it so that anyone with a link can edit, not just view, but edit. So of course they could edit each other's work if you wanted them to, but that's not the main thing. Remember, you want everyone to think, and collaborative learning has the risk that some people are doing more of the thinking than others, even though it's not always terrible. You need to really control it. So here you're creating a shared document, knowing that it's kind of open to everybody. But why is it so useful? It's because you can see the writing happen simultaneously. Now you can do identical things with Padlet. You can have Padlet with everyone on their Padlet. You can do it with other documents. You can set the page orientation to be portrait, so it feels more like essay-ish. So this is a kind of landscape version. But basically, you set up a template slide, and here is a comparative analysis question. And we've given the students a task of writing. Now, what I do is I can do it a number of ways. I can pre-make it. It depends on the age of my students. I can copy that slide for all the students, and I can pre-write their name in it. I can write Tom in there, and everyone finds their own slide. With older students, you can just say, guys, find the template slide, copy it for yourself, and put your own name in it, and that's perfectly manageable. But they have to, learn to do it. And then what happens is you've got everybody who's got a slide of their own, which is identical because they've copied it, but they find one and they start writing in it. What's great about this, the superpower of it, is this: I can view them all at the same time. If I make that smaller, I can go smaller. I can see them all. Now, I can see all the slides simultaneously. I've got a class of 30. I see 30 slides. Everyone's writing, and the writing, as they start going, appears kind of in the slides. It's quite magical, and I can just scan through them. I can start looking at them, going, okay, how's James getting on? Okay, not bad. Yeah, that's good. He's doing well. Alan, keep going. Well done. Michelle. Okay, Michelle, I'm going to have a bit of a feedback here. I've seen something you've made a mistake. So I zoom in on Michelle. I can give her feedback and write comments. So this is guiding the practice. It's happening now. I'm giving them a task to do, and I'm trying to get them to do it just like I've shown them. And I'm seeing it happen now. So I've got this tight feedback loop. I've shown you something, and now I'm checking if you're doing it. So it's not like a long task. It's a short task. I've given you a task, and I'm seeing if you can do it, and I'm giving you feedback. Some people might need some help. So I've got this sort of ready-made feedback box here. So I prepared this before, and okay, some people are struggling. They need the extra help. And I think that Michelle needs the extra help. So I'm going to give her the feedback box. I copy and paste it onto her slide. So she sees that on her slide because she's working on that. Iris doesn't need it. And what I notice is that Safia is away. Safia probably needs the help too because she's not even here. Safia is missing. I can see she's missing, but her slide isn't missing. And later we can say to Safia, look, you missed the lesson, but your slide is there and I want you to do the task like everyone else. So you can mop in people who are missing. So this to me is a really good tool. There are loads of things you can do with it in terms of editing, viewing, highlighting, and the students can copy their own slide into their own work later. And it can be a longer task if you want it to be. But the beauty of it is this. This is my classroom guidance. This is my guided learning thing. I don't have to walk around the class looking. In fact, it's even easier than that. I can just see the work appearing. And I could structure that initial slide any way I like. That could be a grid. It could be an image. Jamboard is similar to this, but Jamboard is not as flexible in terms of writing. It starts off with much bigger textbooks, so you have to reduce it all. But it's good for things like an image. Let's say a labeled diagram. Here's a diagram, right? Label it, describe the structure and function, and you might find Jamboard is better for that because it's got more graphic tools. But the basic idea is it's a shared thing where you can see everybody's work simultaneously while you supervise. So you are guiding the practice. That's what you're trying to do. For independent practice, the main thing is you've got to allow students to be able to know exactly what to do. So a clear task list, success criteria. So if I've been set off to do a task, imagine yourself, if you were set off to do a task, you'd want to know what would it look like if I'm done? What does a good one look like? What would be the success criteria if I can tick them off? And to have some sense of ownership of that process. So by the end, you come to the end, yeah, okay, I know I've done it. And I've done it reasonably well because that's the standard. Does mine match that standard? No. Okay, I've got to do some work on it. So if you can't even tell that for yourself, how do you know to stop? So having some agency building process where the students are learning to see the standard of their work rather than being entirely dependent on you. Of course, if they're younger, that's harder. Without it being massive workload of dumping the work in. So the more you can rely on the students to check their own work themselves, the better. But, you know, if that's the guiding past the remote, the live lessons is much more difficult. And there's just no two ways about that. The last thing I'm going to say is that, and this is a thing which, again, I know people were developing this back in June. just for pragmatic reasons. But it was interesting to see this specifically mentioned as an idea in the recent Teach Like a Champion Uncommon Schools workshop I went to last week, where they had this, they had a name for it, which is called semi-synchronous lessons. And I thought, okay, they've given a name to something which I know lots of teachers have been using. Semi-synchronous lessons are when you sort of start off live and you end live, but in the middle the students are kind of doing stuff on their own. But you're kind of there, but you're kind of not talking directly, you're just available. So you start off with a live lesson, loads of cold calling, hi, hello, welcome, loads of names, do a bit of check for understanding on the recent lesson, set them some tasks, and check they've understood the tasks. And then you say, okay, guys, half an hour, I'm here, you can message me on the chat, or actually, Michael, I need to speak to you, so stay on camera, everyone else is off. And then the other students have got an independent task. You may be able to monitor that if they're doing it on Google Slides. You could see that work going on because you can see it. It might be questions on a sheet which are coming in because you've got loads of questions and they're coming in. You can see them coming in, or it might just be paper and pen, and they're going to upload it later. And then, given time, you say, "Okay, guys, everybody back to me now," and you have a live recap. Back on camera. Great to see you again. Welcome back. Let's see how you got on. And you sort of cap the lesson off with a kind of together. And that type of sandwich, and in their suggestion, you're talking about an hour's lesson, like 40 minutes is independent. There's like 10 minutes each end, which is live. That kind of balance is a neat way of blending the best bits of those sorts of approaches to get us close to the kind of guided practice, independent practice, check for understanding, as Rosenshine's principles kind of might suggest. So there you go. Not easier said than done, but it's like anything, but those are the kind of the basic ideas. So for me, that idea of the semi-synchronous weekly, monthly review kind of thing is a good thing to think about. So I'll stop sharing there. I think that's probably enough, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Thanks, Tom. That was really, really good, really informative, and a great sort of overview of Rosenshine's principles. And I know you've done some fabulous work, both nationally and internationally around the world, to support teachers. So it's really, really sort of great to have you here. And just from a point of view from our school, we've been using a lot of those suggestions, and we have used the Google Slides and enabling all students to access them. And I concur with Tom, the impact it has in terms of trying to, I suppose, what Doug Lemov talks about trying to dissolve the screen as much as we can in the current climate is really important. And that's really helped to sort of synchronize that feedback simultaneously to our students. So I don't know if anyone's got any specific questions. There was nothing specific in the chat, actually, Tom, and everyone was more praising what they were hearing, and even what was fantastic to see was people were sharing some other ideas that they've used as well. So I don't know if anyone has got any specific questions that they would like to ask Tom to address what he's talked about specifically. And while we just wait for those few odd questions potentially come in, I'm going to hand over to Tim Stirrup, who's going to discuss sort of our involvement that we've had as a sort of EdTech demonstrator school, and how we've sort of supported other schools around the country with their remote provision.
Can I just make a suggestion before we do that? It's just to say, in terms of questions, is to prompt people to just say, if you're sharing with your colleagues, or what sorts of problems do some of your colleagues experience? Or do you experience? And just put them in the chat just to have a means of discussion. So even if they're not your actual questions, what sorts of questions do you think might people find useful to answer? So just put them in on their behalf.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'll hand over to Tim for a minute.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Tom. That was really, really informative. It's I think one of the things I've always seen with regards to professional development over the years is, as well as taking the advice and the comments and the suggestions that Tom's given you today, is also to go away and work on these over the next few weeks. And that really brings me to what the EdTech Demonstrator School program is about. Kings Warrington, GST Kings Warrington are one of the schools that are the demonstrator schools. You can see the geographic locations behind us, that have been set up by the DFE to provide schools with free CPD support for the use of technology for remote education for about half a term's worth. So you can be paired with a demonstrator school that could, for example, think, okay, well, we want to embed Rosenshine's principles in using technology. We use them in the school, we use cold calling or whatever it is that you're doing as a matter of course. How can we do this using the technology that we have? And so what the EdTech demonstrator school program does is link your school with another school that can help. And then you spend about 6 weeks, half a term's worth of support as you need in your school. And I think this is the key thing, is it's bespoke to your school, working with schools like GST Kings, working with Mike, and as well as them putting on webinars. So I also mentioned in the chat that coming up later this week, there's another seminar which also uses Teams. So I know some people were talking about how do we use Teams to do this kind of thing, about using Rosenshine in primary schools. There's another one about secondary schools. If you look at the links that I put into the chat on the side, edtech-demonstrator.lgfl.net, that's where you can see lots of resources, about 1,000 videos on there already, which are teachers helping teachers. You can also sign up for the support. As I say, it's 6 weeks of free support worked out what you need in your school. I would say please do sign up. The more that sign up, or put it this way, the sooner you sign up, the quicker you get it, like with everything. Teachers helping teachers, the feedback that we're getting is that teachers helping teachers, schools helping schools really is beneficial. And I do commend that to you. So what I'll do is I'll put the sign up back into there. Thank you, Tom, for all of that work. The potential for technology to support good pedagogy, good teaching is immense, and we really do look forward to seeing more of that. So I'll put the link again for the EdTech Demonstrator School program. Just to mention, as I say, it's DFE, it's free of charge, 6 weeks of free support, and I shall hand back to Mike.
Thanks, Tim. Just to say, Tom, we have got a few questions just before we close. So someone has asked about cold calling, and asked about getting some students who are still not necessarily involved in the lesson remotely. What have you got? Any sort of other ideas that could support that increase in engagement?
I think the main thing is to, and someone else I noticed asked a question about chasing students up with work completed. I think you need to have a system where every single student, literally all of them, know that you notice if they're there and if they're doing the work. So you need to have some sort of tracker. So, for example, the Google Sheet, and that could be questions from last week's work, and you've set that as a pre-task at the beginning of a lesson. Now, the students might be skulking in a corner, they're shy to participate, but they're online or they're at home, and you're saying, okay, put your answers in, and you deal with that live in the bit when you're there on camera saying, thank you to so-and-so, thank you to so-and-so, great answer so-and-so. So you're very affirmative with all the students who've done it. And you're saying, Michael, I didn't see your answer for number one. What did you think? And you just say, or you might say he has put something in. So you say, oh, brilliant, Michael hardly ever answers, but he's put something in the Google Sheet. That, Michael, brilliant answer to number 4. What, can you just expand on it? No, great answer. Why made you think of that? So you give him a reason to speak about something he's got right. So wherever you can get students to talk about something they already know, you already know they're right. Like even it's in the chat. If you're not worried, if you don't want to put it on, if you don't want to be on camera, let's see you in the chat. So, Darren, Jessica, Janet, I can't see your faces, but just put your answers in the chat. Janet's got a great answer. That's excellent. Janet, do you think you can add to that? Do you want to come on camera? Okay, well, just expand on your answer in the chat and we'll see you. Brilliant. So you're just constantly, every chance you see them at all, you reaffirm them for being there, and then you praise them for their good answers, but then to get them to expand on that answer. You don't just say, thank you for just answering with one word. You say, great answer, but what? And then they're more likely to engage. If someone told me that as soon as they spoke to them on camera, they went off and disappeared, and that was like a problem. So there are some issues with that, but where you can have live checking. So that feeds into another question about formative assessment. I'm thinking the main thing is, what are they supposed to know and how can I check that? So you need questions which test the knowledge, which the students can see. Now, then the question is, how do they get those questions? Well, they could be in their workbooks, they could be digital questions in a Quizlet app or on forms or just on a text, and they're just posting you the answers. Whatever they're doing, you need to then have a list of your students' names and say, okay, have I got the answers back from everybody? And then the tighter those questions are around a certain topic, the more formative they're going to be for your responsiveness. So it could be day to day. You know, if you're seeing your primary class regularly, you can feed into that. If it's weekly, because it's a secondary class, and weekly might be a good frequency. Every week we have a quick knowledge check on the previous learning. How are we doing? If you set it up on Google Sheets, so it's self-marking, the students already know their marks, and you're just dealing with the information that's given you. You can say, okay, right, what this tells me is that some of you still don't know this and some of you don't know that. So any way of getting the answers to you is formative assessment. And if you make it too big and bloated, like you test them once every 4 weeks on an enormous amount of stuff, it's hard to then respond to it all, isn't it? But if it's short and sweet, regular, it's easier to deal with little bits of knowledge. But all those things are all about chipping away and constantly reaffirming the positive. So well done for doing that. Thank you for being here. Great answer, so-and-so. And that affirmation for a reason. So it's not just thank you. It's thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing that. And then following up. One of the things that the Teach Like a Champion people recommend is affirmative cold calling. So they'll choose people for their good answers. So in the chat, they'll say, oh, Michael, thank you for your good answer. Now let's take that forward. So every time someone has done something good and effective, you reward them in a way by not noticing it as much as you possibly can. There's no rocket science to that. I mean, if students are really, really reluctant and really hard to reach, they are. I mean, there's no like magic wand. Occasionally, you're going to have to take stock at the end of a fortnight or something and say, who is really missing from this process? And then try to reach them directly, phone them up and reel them back in. And that's all you can do. You have to have a hit list of certain students that you just need to contact because they're just not with you. And you notice that. But the smaller the number of that is, the better, obviously. If it's like 15 kids and then think something's going wrong, but that's all you can do. You have to keep chipping away, keep lists, keep checking in, and be really conscious of who's there and who's not. That's why I like that spreadsheet, because it's there in the lesson. You can be referring to who's not answered each individual bit. It's quite nice. I noticed someone asked me a question about whether Whiteboard Fi was any different or better than Google Slides. I'm not an expert on that, but the feedback I've had from it is that it's really good. So it works on lots of platforms. You just send the link, and it does allow you to do text writing, which is quite small. It's not just like big writing like a whiteboard, but it can be. So you can do big response writing on a big font size. So everyone could, like 3, 2, 1, show me, or it can be that. So it might be almost identical to Google Slides, really, but it's just another thing. The reason I like Google Slides is because if you're in Google Classroom, for example, it's just already there, and it's not an extra thing to log into. But there's loads of tools like that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thank you for that. And I agree with Tom. We've been using a number of those tools, including the interactives, like all the online whiteboards, to contribute towards some formative assessment. But I think I agree with what Tom's saying. It's about that sort of constant chipping away, about that building that confidence in participating in sort of online classroom. What we have found is that because as a academy, we've been doing it since the first lockdown in March. We found in this second phase of lockdown that students are now quite well equipped. They're well rehearsed and reversed into how to participate in their Zoom lessons, and that's helped to build their confidence over time. So we are going to draw a close now. I just want to say a big thank you again to Tom for coming along. I am going to make a public apology on Twitter for the technical issue, because we did have 1,700 signed up to join us, and due to Tom's popularity, Zoom has seemed to have exploded at that number and hasn't allowed people to come in. But we have recorded the session, so I've noticed in the chat that a few people have asked about will their colleagues and other colleagues be able to watch it. I am going to work tirelessly over the next hour or so to edit the video. It will be uploaded this evening for people to be able to watch at their leisure. So I just want to apologise again for anyone who was unable to join us live this evening. But big thank you again to Tom, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining, everybody. Thanks very much.